There are mistakes that unravel you thread by thread, and then there are the ones that rewrite your very soul. Mine began in the crushing humidity of a Savannah August, with a glass of iced lemonade and the boy who came to stay in the house next door. Don't repeat my mistakes, or if you do, know that some mistakes are the only things that can ever truly save you. The air was thick enough to drink, a heavy cocktail of salt marsh, sweet olive, and the first hints of autumn decay. I was in the walled courtyard behind my townhouse, a space I'd fought to reclaim from a decade of neglect, just as I was trying to reclaim myself. My name is Dr. Isabel Vance, and at 42, I was a newly minted cliché, the recently divorced art history professor seeking refuge in a city too beautiful to be sad in for long. The quiet was the point. The solitude was the prize I had won after a marriage that had been anything but. That solitude was shattered by the groan of a rental truck's ramp next door. I peered through the wrought iron gate that separated my property from my neighbors, the distinguished and perpetually traveling Allinghams. A young man, backlit by the oppressive afternoon sun, was wrestling a bicycle out of the truck. He was tall and lean, with the kind of effortless grace that belongs only to the young. He moved with a quiet competence, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Need a hand?" I called out, my voice startling me. I hadn't intended to speak. He looked up, shielding his eyes with his hand. His hair was the color of dark honey, and his eyes, even from a distance, seemed startlingly clear. "I think I've got it. Thanks, though." He gave the bike one last heave, and it clattered onto the cobblestone driveway. He brushed his hands on his jeans and walked toward the gate, a friendly, open smile on his face. "You must be the new neighbor." "I'm Liam." "The Allinghams are my grandparents. I'm house-sitting for them until the semester starts." "Isabel Vance," I said, extending a hand through the bars of the gate. We shook, his hand warm and firm against my own. "It's a pleasure." His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of recognition. "Wait, Dr. Vance, you gave a guest lecture at my high school a few years ago, on the architecture of dissent. It was the first time I realized buildings could be arguments. I was taken aback. I remembered that lecture. A room full of blank-faced teenagers, and I had assumed not a single word had landed. "You remember that?" "I've never forgotten it," he said, and his sincerity was so direct, so unvarnished, it felt like a physical touch. "It's half the reason I'm studying architecture now." I found myself smiling, a genuine, unguarded smile that felt foreign on my face. "Well, in that case, the least I can do is offer you something cold to drink." "This heat is unforgiving." He gave me that smile again, the one that reached his eyes. "I'd like that very much, Dr. Vance." He came through the gate a few minutes later, looking around my small, verdant courtyard with an architect's eye. He noticed the careful restoration of the brickwork, the way the climbing jasmine was trained to frame the archway. He saw the details my ex-husband, a fellow academic, had always dismissed as my little hobbies. "This place is incredible," Liam said, his voice soft with appreciation. "You've honored the history of it." I handed him a tall glass of lemonade, our fingers brushing for a fraction of a second too long. A jolt, faint but undeniable, passed between us. I dismissed it as a phantom of the oppressive heat. "Thank you. It's a work in progress." "The best things always are," he said, his gaze meeting mine over the rim of his glass. He was 22. I knew this because he told me, explaining he was going into his final year at SCAD, and he talked about his passion for sustainable design, for spaces that breathe with their environment. I listened, mesmerized not by a boy, but by a mind alight with passion. He wasn't just handsome, he was interesting, and that I knew was a far more dangerous thing. When he left an hour later, the courtyard felt empty, the silence no longer peaceful, but hollow. I stood by the gate long after he was gone, the condensation from his glass leaving a perfect, ephemeral ring on the stone table. I told myself it was nothing, a pleasant conversation with an intelligent young man, a flattering moment for a forgotten lecture. I was being ridiculous. But as the sun began to bleed across the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple, I couldn't shake the feeling that a single, stray thread had just been pulled from the carefully woven fabric of my new, quiet life. The days that followed fell into an unnerving rhythm. Liam would appear in the late afternoon, sometimes with a book on architectural theory he thought I'd find interesting, other times with a bag of peaches from the farmer's market. Our conversations became the anchor of my day. We'd sit in the courtyard, the air thick with the drone of cicadas, and we would talk for hours. He spoke of the pressure from his pragmatic parents to go into business, their dismissal of his architectural ambitions as a boyish dream. I found myself sharing things I hadn't spoken of in years, telling him of my own stifled dreams of being a painter, dreams my husband had gently but systematically discouraged in favor of the more stable path of academia. With Liam, I wasn't Dr. Vance, the stoic professor. I was Isabel, a woman with a past, with hidden layers he seemed intent on discovering. He listened with an intensity that was both flattering and terrifying. He didn't just hear my words. He seemed to understand the spaces between them. "He made you feel small, didn't he?" he said one evening, after I'd told a story about my ex-husband critiquing a paper I'd written. The question was so direct it left me breathless. "Yes," I whispered. He did. "Greatness is terrified of competition," Liam said, his voice low and certain. "He wasn't trying to help you. He was trying to contain you." In that moment, he saw through 15 years of a complicated marriage with more clarity than any therapist I'd ever seen. He saw me, and the gratitude I felt was so potent it bordered on pain. This was the mistake. Not the touching, not the flirting, but this feeling of being profoundly, frighteningly understood by someone I had no business being understood by. One evening, the sky opened up. A ferocious summer thunderstorm rolled in from the coast, turning the sky a bruised purple gray. Rain came down in sheets, instantly flooding the cobblestone streets. Liam had been over, helping me repot a stubborn gardenia, and we were trapped. We sat in my living room, the lights turned low, the only illumination coming from the frequent silent flashes of lightning that lit up the room. The storm created a bubble of intimacy, sealing us off from the rest of the world. "I think about you," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain lashing against the windows. "When I'm not here, I try to picture what you're doing, what you're thinking about." My heart began a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. "Liam." "I know," he said, turning to face me on the couch. "I know all the reasons why this is a bad idea. I know I'm 22 and you're you. I'm old enough to be, well, not your mother, but an older, deeply inappropriate cousin," I said, trying for levity and failing miserably. "Is that what you think this is about?" he asked, and there was a note of hurt in his voice. "Do you think I'm just some kid with a crush on his professor? Because it's not that. It's not about age. It's about the fact that when I talk to you, I feel like I'm finally speaking the right language. You don't look at me and see a kid. You see my ideas. You see me." He was right, and that was the problem. I was terrified, not of him, but of myself, of the part of me that was awakening after a long, cold hibernation, a part that wanted this, whatever this was. "I am a professor at the university you attend," I said, listing the facts as if they were a shield. "My career, which I have fought tooth and nail for, could be jeopardized. People will talk. They will assume the worst." "Let them," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He moved closer, not touching me, but his proximity was an inferno. What's more important? What they might assume, or what we both know is real? And what is that? I asked, my voice barely audible. This, he said. And he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a boy's kiss. It was slow and deep and breathtakingly sure. It was a kiss that held every conversation we'd ever had. It was questioning and answering all at once. And I, Dr. Isabel Vance, who had built a fortress of solitude and intellectual rigor around her broken heart, kissed him back. The thunder cracked directly overhead, and in that moment, I didn't care if the entire house came crashing down around us. The mistake had been made. The thread had been pulled, and everything was beginning to unravel. When he finally pulled away, we were both breathing heavily. The silence in the room was charged, electric. "I'm scared," I whispered, the admission tasting like surrender on my tongue. "Me too," he said, his thumb gently tracing my jawline. "But not of this." He stayed until the storm passed, and we didn't kiss again. We just sat in the charged quiet, listening to the rain soften to a drizzle. When he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "Isabel," he said, testing my name on his tongue for the first time. It sounded different coming from him, newer. "Liam," I replied. A silent agreement passed between us. This was not a one-time storm-induced madness. This was a beginning. And as he slipped out into the rain-washed night, I sank onto the couch, my hand to my lips, and felt the terrifying, exhilarating thrill of a free fall. The morning after the storm, Savannah was scrubbed clean, the air crystalline and cool. I felt as though I, too, had been cleansed of something, my certainty, my carefully constructed peace, my fear. In its place was a quiet, humming anxiety that was not entirely unpleasant. I spent the day in a state of suspended animation, trying to work on a syllabus for my fall seminar on Renaissance portraiture, but the words blurred. Every rustle of leaves outside, every car that passed, made my heart leap. I was waiting for him. I hated that I was waiting. He didn't come, nor did he the next day. A cold dread began to seep into the edges of my exhilaration. Had he regretted it? Had the cold light of day revealed the folly of it all? My mind, my greatest asset, became my torturer, replaying every moment, analyzing every word for signs of a mistake, a misinterpretation. I had been reckless. I had allowed my loneliness to overwhelm my judgment. On the third day, I was pruning the bougainvillea in the courtyard, my movements vicious and jerky, when the gate creaked open. It was Liam. He looked tired, and his usual easy smile was absent. "Can we talk?" he asked. He followed me inside, and we stood in the kitchen, the space between us feeling like a chasm. "I went to see my parents," he began, not looking at me. "I told them I was thinking of taking a semester off to work on a portfolio for a graduate program, to work with a private mentor." I waited, my heart a stone in my chest. "My father, he didn't take it well," Liam continued, his voice tight. "He called it a waste of time, a fantasy. He said I needed to finish my degree and get a real job. He said he wasn't going to finance my delusions." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were full of a pain that made my own ache in sympathy. And my mother just stood there. She didn't say a word. "Oh, Liam," I breathed. "The thing is, Isabel," he said, stepping closer. "In the middle of him yelling, telling me how I was going to fail, the only thing I could think about was you, about what you said, that my ideas had merit, that my voice mattered, and I realized I don't care what he thinks. I don't care if I have to get a job waiting tables to finance it myself. I'm not going to let him contain me." He reached for my hands, his grip firm, desperate. "I didn't come over because I wanted you to know that this isn't just a fling. You've changed how I see my own future. You've changed everything." And that scares the hell out of me, but it also feels like the most real thing in my life. The stone in my chest dissolved. This wasn't a boy running from a mistake. This was a man standing up for his life, and somehow I had become a part of it. "We have to be smart about this," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "We have to be careful." "I'll be whatever you need me to be," he said. "Discreet, patient, a friend. Just don't ask me to pretend I don't feel this." And so began our secret season. We built a world within the walls of my townhouse and its courtyard. He would come over under the cover of dusk. We would cook together, our bodies moving in a quiet, synchronized dance in the small kitchen. We talked about art, about music, about our shared pasts and our uncertain futures. He would sketch for hours at my dining table while I worked, the only sound the scratching of his pencil on paper and the soft clicking of my keyboard. It was an impossible idyll. And like all idols, it was destined to be breached. The breach came in the form of my department head, Dr. Alistair Finch, a man who considered himself my mentor and who still felt a misplaced loyalty to my ex-husband. He saw me at a cafe one afternoon, leaving just as Liam was arriving. We didn't speak to each other, but the glance that passed between us was enough. The next day, Alistair called me into his office. "Isabel," he said, steepling his fingers, "I feel it's my duty to caution you. There are whispers, an inappropriate friendship with a student. You know how damaging such rumors can be, especially for a woman in your position." The threat was veiled, but clear. Stay in your lane. Don't cause trouble. I walked out of his office, my blood cold. He had seen a ghost of a possibility and had already tried to bury it. I thought of my ex-husband, of his quiet manipulations, his subtle dismissals. This was the same poison in a different bottle. And I had spent too long building an immunity to it to succumb now. That night when Liam came over, I told him what had happened. I watched his face tighten, his hands clench into fists. "I'll leave," he said immediately. "I won't see you again. I won't let them hurt you." I looked at him, at this beautiful, honorable young man willing to sacrifice his own heart for my career. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. The mistake wasn't loving him. The mistake would be letting fear win. The mistake would be choosing the fortress over the freefall. "No," I said, my voice clear and steady. "You won't leave, and I won't hide." I took his hand. "Tomorrow you and I are going to the Contemporary Art Museum, and we will walk through the galleries together. We will have coffee in the cafe. We will not touch. We will not break any rules. We will simply be two people who admire the same art, enjoying a public space. And we will let them whisper. We will let them see that I am not ashamed." A slow smile spread across his face. "Okay, Isabel," he said softly. "Okay." And we did. The next day, we went to the museum. I saw the looks, the whispers from colleagues and students we passed. I felt the weight of their judgment. But as I stood with Liam in front of a massive, chaotic, beautiful Joan Mitchell painting, discussing its raw energy, I felt his presence next to me, calm, steady, and proud. The whispers of others were nothing compared to the powerful, honest truth of our connection. I don't know what the future holds for us. It is a path fraught with complications. But I am no longer afraid of the mistake, because I have learned that life's most profound beauty is often found not in the carefully planned compositions, but in the accidental, breathtaking collision of colors you never saw coming. My mistake was not falling for the boy next door. My only mistake would have been not having the courage to fall at all.